Harvey Milk was the first openly gay person to be elected to public office in California. In his 40s, Milk moved to Castro Street, New York City's most recognizably gay neighborhood. He became known as the mayor of Castro Street. While in office, Milk strongly emphasized gay rights and was the driving force behind the passage of a gay rights ordinance that prohibited discrimination in housing and employment based on sexual orientation. He also defeated a state Senate proposal that would have prohibited gays and lesbians from teaching in public schools in California. While Harvey Milk made a huge difference in his life on the topic of gay rights, since his death, Harvey Milk has become a national symbol for gay rights. Since his death, his nephew founded the Milk Foundation, which supports LGBT youth and local, regional, and global organizations to learn and utilize Harvey Milk's story. Also, there have been 2 films documenting his life, an opera about him, the Harvey Milk Memorial Parade in San Francisco, and the Harvey Milk High School in New York. Bayard Rustin was a key gay icon during the times of Martin Luther King Jr. Bayard's most recognizable contribution was his speech on the civil rights of gays. Rustin also testified on behalf of the New York City's gay bill. Rustin, however, was much more prominent in helping the racial equality movement. Harvey was much more prominent than Bayard Rustin in the gay rights movement, and Harvey had much more of a lasting impact on the fight for equality for gays.
Susan B. Anthony and Gloria Steinem were both pivotal women in the advancement of women's rights. Steinem has been a force to be reckoned with, finding women their place in modern-day society. In the 1960s, she began getting involved in women's rights issues of the day, including abortion rights, the Equal Rights Amendment, and labor laws. She founded and co-founded many groups, including the Women's Action Alliance, on which she served as a chair of the board throughout the 1970s, the NWPC, the Coalition of Labor Union Women, the Miss Foundation for Women, Choice USA, and Women's Media Center. From 1971 to 1975, she served on the advisory board of the Westbeth Playwrights Feminist Collective, one of the first New York City published-based feminist theater groups. Steinem made enormous strides for women and was often depicted as the leader of the second-wave feminism movement. According to the University of Chicago professor Christine Stransel, she was to the women's movement what Martin Luther King was to civil rights, the galvanizer. With similar objectives, Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights. She grew up during the peace that followed the American Revolution, in which more restrictions and legal obstacles were imposed on married women. Anthony was not going to stand for this injustice and joined the movement, mounting a door-to-door campaign collecting signatures for a petition to give women the right to vote and own property. This allowed women to achieve their first victory with the passage of a bill granting them their ability to own property and earnings. Soon thereafter, Anthony edited The Revolution, a weekly magazine that raised issues of divorce, prostitution, and the exploitation of women wage earners. The Revolution fueled the fire inside of Anthony. She knew that she must do something to earn women their right to vote. Anthony registered to vote, and after voting was arrested on her doorstep. While Steinem made immense strides in the second wave of feminism, she had the support of those around her. She could openly voice her opinions on feminism because of those who had come before her, like Susan B. Anthony. Anthony made these rights prevalent for the first time in American history.
While Medgar Evers and Rosa Parks are both well-known civil rights activists, Evers played a bigger part in the struggle for black equality. Evers and Parks were both members of the NAACP and both elected to be secretaries for their chapters. They were also both well known for their boycotts against racism. Parks has one special boycott against the segregation on public transportation, while Evers has multiple boycotts. Evers' boycotts include the boycott campaign against white merchants, the boycott of service stations that denied blacks use of their restrooms, and was the focus of the NAACP campaign to desegregate the University of Mississippi. Evers also founded the Regional Council of Negro Leadership and was an avowed supporter of Martin Luther King Jr.
Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were both African-American activists who believed in finding rights for their people. Malcolm X was a prominent leader who doubted that nonviolent protests would ever produce the desired changes in the lives of blacks. He was a student of Muhammad and emerged as a leader of the black Muslims. He spoke from mosques, street corners, and university campuses, praising the virtues of embracing black pride and separatism. Malcolm X rallied blacks around the idea that whites oppressed them and should be brought to justice for their evils. In 1964, he broke away from the black Muslims, which promised new hope to his many followers that he would create a separate black nation. He believed the only way to do this in a timely manner was to fight violently for their rights. He felt that African Americans should fight racial oppression by any means necessary. He gained followers from those who were frustrated with the slow progress of Martin Luther King's teachings. Soon thereafter, Malcolm X's house was firebombed by the black Muslims. Comparatively to the teachings of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. fought for equality through a nonviolent movement. King was the pivotal leader in the civil rights movement. He led the Montgomery bus boycott, organized nonviolent protests in Birmingham, Alabama, and most recognizably organized the March on Washington. There, he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. Because of his immense efforts in the civil rights movement, King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for nonviolently combating racial inequality. The next year, King switched gears and also focused on poverty and the Vietnam War rather than just African American rights. Soon thereafter, King planned the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. King was assassinated in Memphis on April 4, 1968. While Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were both assassinated because of their racial strides for equality, Martin Luther King's nonviolence ideas prevailed and are still valued today. His progress was key in the success of the civil rights movement. So as you can see, Harvey Milk and Susan B. Anthony both won their ends of the bracket and will be fighting off for the North Conference title. While in the South, Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King won their sectionals and will be facing off for the conference title.
Harvey Milk and Susan B. Anthony both made tremendous leaps in the area that they chose to fight for, Milk's being gay rights and Susan B. Anthony's being women's rights. Like mentioned earlier, Harvey Milk has made many lasting impacts on the fight for gay equality after his death, but so has Susan B. Anthony. The main thing that puts Susan B. Anthony one step ahead of Harvey Milk is the struggle she went through for her cause. While Harvey Milk went through a very hard time too, it wasn't unheard of to fight for gay rights during Harvey Milk's time, but fighting for women's rights when Susan B. Anthony did was completely unheard of and one of the bravest things, if not the bravest thing, a woman at that time could have done. This fact in itself is what pulls Susan B. Anthony ahead of Harvey Milk.
Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King Jr. were both extremely active civil rights advocates, and their main actions were boycotts and marches. While Evers had many boycotts for black equality, King was the leader of several marches and performed various speeches against racism, poverty, and war. Martin Luther King Jr. reached a broader range of civil rights than Evers did. King was a spokesperson for the bus boycott and inspired 50,000 African Americans to walk the streets rather than ride the segregated buses. Other forms of boycott that King led were multiple sit-ins, the Freedom Rides, the Great March on Washington, the Selma to Montgomery March, the James Meredith March in Mississippi, and the Poor People's March to demand a Bill of Rights for the disadvantaged. Martin Luther King Jr. also won the Nobel Peace Prize for his actions, but donated the prize money to the furtherance of the civil rights movement.
As you can see, Susan B. Anthony defeated Harvey Milk for the North Conference title, while Martin Luther King defeated Medgar Evers for the South Conference title. Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King Jr. will battle out for the title of the most impactful civil rights activist. Susan B. Anthony and Martin Luther King Jr. are two people who will live on in American history forever. Both of these leaders profoundly changed the way people view their issues today. Without the leadership and courage of Susan B. Anthony, there is a great chance that women in today's society would still be looked as lesser to men, and without Martin Luther King Jr.'s heroism and determination, whites and blacks may still be separated today. Picking which of these was a better civil rights activist is virtually impossible, not because neither of them deserves to be on top, but because putting one of them below the other seems immoral because of their devotion and battle that each of them put up for the cause they were fighting for. However, Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to helping both men and women fight for their racial equality, while Susan B. Anthony's life task was to gain women equality. In the end, we believed that because of this, Martin Luther King impacted more lives than Susan B. Anthony, making Martin Luther King Jr. the winner of our civil rights activist pool.